Welcome to CAREER22, a series of videos about the skills we need for a career in the 22nd century. My name is Miguel.
Milton.
And we are both founders of Ungap Education, and we also both university professors. After years, several years actually, teaching and helping our students to kickstart their careers, we realize that this is one of the most critical and stressful processes in their lives, to find a career path, to make the right decision. And that's why we decided to actually bring you a couple of learnings about how to start your career for the 22nd century in these short videos. And our topic for today is something very, very, very interesting. Authenticity, right, Milton?
That's correct. We thought that many of the things we've been talking about wouldn't work if you wouldn't be authentic. And we would like to explore a bit about what this means. And we see many people not being able to be successful in their careers, and people suffering a lot in their careers because of various aspects that concern this idea of authenticity. And the way we look at authenticity is the following. First of all, we think that authenticity is very much related, and maybe initially related, to this idea of self-awareness, right? You need to be aware of your principles, your values, your beliefs, aware of your goals, aware of your strengths, but also your weakness. And this place of awareness is very important. And we talked about reflection in another part, but being very conscious about that, we think is very important, to have them very present. And that should serve as a sort of a guiding light towards your choices and towards how you behave. And this is the second aspect of authenticity in our view, is this idea of coherence, right? Coherence in terms of an alignment between your principles, your values, your goals, and your choices. Coherence in terms of what you say and what you do, that they are somehow in resonance. And also consistency or coherence throughout time, that the things you say today will not differ significantly from tomorrow and the day after, that there's some form of consistency throughout time, especially when it comes to your principles and your values and the things you believe. And of course, things do change, but there needs to be some coherence in your argumentation around that change so that people understand where it comes from. So it needs to be centered. And the last part in our view about authenticity is this idea of being honest, and this idea of being sincere in a kind way towards others, which also relates to this idea of being able to say no to the things you don't want to do and the things you think you shouldn't do. And we talk about the possibility mindset before, where you are able to say yes to life, but often you will also be confronted with moments where you have to say no. And we see that authenticity comes with that ability of saying no at some point. So these three aspects of self-awareness, coherence, and being honest and being sincere in a kind way form, in our view, key aspects of being authentic.
Yeah, fantastic. I think, authenticity is really needed in the world we're living. So I think it's probably we had it towards a more human society. So being authentic is, is good for others, but also good for yourself, right? So can we give some examples of this? When and how, actually authenticity played a important role in a career of someone?
Yeah, I mean, I know quite a few examples of people who were very authentic and that and very successful people. At least, let's put it this way: the people that I've seen as being most successful, at least in my experience, are most of the times very authentic. And a recent example of a good friend of mine who was appointed CFO of a company was confronted with a situation whereby the board was doing things that she thought were not very ethical and not in the best interests of the firm. And despite the fact that this was a dream job for her, that she was envisioning already for a long time, highly paid position in a good, sizable business, and having been there for actually not too long, she decided to decline the position after a few months and to step away because she thought this wasn't in coherence with her principles and her values. And she also understood that if she would accept to play that role and accept that sort of position under those circumstances, maybe in the short run she could get away with that, but she also understood the risks of what that could mean for her long-term future. And it's interesting what she told me is that people out there really appreciated the courage of being authentic in that moment, which actually increased the career possibilities. And I think she will get an even better job now as a senior executive than what she had, because she acted in coherence with the principles and her values, and in this case, ethical principles and values. For me, that was a very good example of authenticity at its best.
Yeah, great. Another example I know is basically one time there was this executive education that was actually doing the talent recruitment for for a company, and actually they were looking for more than just CVs. They were looking for more soft skills and complete kind of managers in the early phase of their careers. So they were actually testing, how coherent and authentic you were. And they tested this on a very interesting experiment, because they rather than doing just one interview, they did several interviews in several contexts, and they measured in each of the interviews if the answer was consistent according to to the beginning. And the majority of candidates actually were changing according to the context that the interview was happening. And one interview was a very tough guy, really assertive, and it was pushing him hard. So the candidates, the majority of them, adapted so fast because they wanted to please. And other times it was more, more gentle and affiliative person interviewing. So probably the answers were not coherent between the two of them. So they tested this on 3 or 4 moments in 3 or 4 different contexts to check how how stable and true to themselves were this, rather than just in one interview. That's interesting, right? So it's becoming part of the recruiting process as well.
No, I see that. It's interesting you say that. What we see is that the companies that are seen as the great place to work, and they are seen by others or by employees as a place where you want to work, often value authenticity very strongly, right? And they hire for attitude, and that in that attitude comes this sense of honesty and of being true to yourself and true to others, and that's a very, very important value or principle that companies are looking for when hiring people. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a little bit like with friends. Nobody likes people that are not authentic, that perhaps are have 2 faces or 2 personalities or 3 or more, right? Nobody likes the people that are not coherent and consistent over time. People that are changing, you don't trust them so much, right? So I think it's the same. Okay, so what about some hacks, tips, and tricks on how to actually train and develop our best authenticity for a better career?
Yeah, one of the tips that I like the most, and I came across the work of Clayton Christensen a few times in the field of innovation, and at some point he also wrote a book called "How Do You Measure Your Life," which is about success and making choices, and what is success in your life eventually. And one of the things he addresses in that book is this idea of marginal thinking, especially when it comes to unethical behavior or unprincipled behavior. And the trap that he's calling our attention to is the trap of you thinking, I will do the wrong thing just this once, right? And this is what he means by marginal thinking. Little things that might seem inoffensive in the beginning, and before you know, they can grow out of proportion, and it becomes harder and harder for you to get out of that situation, right? And the tip he gives is like, it's easier to be principled 100% of the time than just 99% of the time. So avoid that trap of marginal thinking, and try to be, coherent and consistent all the time, even as small as it might seem. And that is also a virtue, and it strengthens your character. And this is something that Aristotle talks about a lot, virtue and the strength of character is that ability to be principled even in the smallest things. And that would be the first tip that I would have. Avoid the marginal thinking,
Kind
which is
of
also a trap, right? So avoid the marginal thinking. And indeed, what you were just showing, like avoid that small thing before you know becomes too large for you to control. And many corporate scandals out there start like that. So avoid marginal thinking.
Yeah, that's a great one. On the other side, you always see that some people say, no, I'm one person in my job, in my professional career, and with my friends or family, I'm another person, And I think this is clearly a mistake. Of course, you have to adapt a little bit to the context where you are, but you should not be such a different person in two different contexts. And I think what many people are kind of role playing, and sometimes I think this is a huge mistake. They start role playing so much that they become a prisoners of the character they built. And I've seen that a lot. Some people, they had to be tough because they were so young and, with a responsibility and leading people, they actually assumed that role. And suddenly, after a couple of years, they were stuck in that role. They were unhappy with that role and with the kind of the echo that role played with the others. People hated that role, and he hated that role, or he or she, and it was like a problem. So don't role play. Don't adapt so much that you lose the authenticity of yourself. And I think this is a very important also mistake to avoid.
It's interesting you say that, because we see also in management scholarship, we talk about this idea of institutional theory. We talk about this idea of actors, right? And so actors. So in organizations, we act as in certain roles, and there's two things to it. One is that roles have and contextual roles, what people expect from us, can be so strong that you start imprinting certain behaviors that you might not even believe it. And then you start indeed pretending to be something that maybe you're not. And this is where you need to be very much self-aware and to be very present. This comes to the second tip that I have, which is to trust your gut as well, right? At some point, it just doesn't feel right. Something is out of place. Something is dissonant. And maybe you're playing a role or acting in a way that is too inconsistent with what you believe in and what you are. I think there is room. You mentioned just before this idea that you should be consistent between different parts of your life. I fully agree. There's room to manifest yourself in different ways too. I think you can manifest parts of you in certain contexts and other parts of you in other contexts, right? But they need to come from a place of awareness and from the same core. But not always the context allows you to manifest certain parts of who you are in family, for instance, or maybe in professional life. But that's different from playing roles or acting as if you are different people, right? These are
Pretending,
manifestations
right?
same person, but in different contexts. And I think that's fine. But just pretending you're something else is another. And we've seen too many people pretending and playing a role as in because this is what is cool or because it's what it's new. You know, nowadays everyone is an entrepreneur. I also need to be an entrepreneur. Nowadays, you know, being a blogger is fashionable. I will also open up a blog just because it's fashionable. And that's what we are trying to avoid here, is that people fall into that trap of doing something they're not.
Yeah, that's a very, very important in day to day, because I think we're heading towards an age where trust will become, is already, but it will become, a very important asset, and the ability to generate trust in others, is coming directly from this, right? So I think it's fundamental. Now, also another mistake I see, it's actually people don't know themselves so well. I think people are kind of still, rather than understanding who they are and being completely in attunement with the choices and the intentions that rely on themselves, people are still following the hype, the fad, the fashion, the others' opinions, the peers, and I see more. Well, we see our students. Sometimes they say, everybody's applying to this big company, consulting, or to this, big tech company. I'm also applying, but is it really you? Do you really want that? Is actually that's your choice, or no? I think I will. I feel that I will hate it, but I have to. So why, right? So not being faced to yourself, faithful to yourself. I think it's one big mistake for this, right? And I think that's not authenticity.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned one thing that I really liked is the fact that this aspect of trust. And I think it also relates to that example that I said in the beginning, is that when people are authentic and they are in an assertive, convincing, centered way, it increases the level of trust that people can have on you. And that trust pays back in your career big time. You might even lose in the short term, but it definitely pays back in the longer run. So authenticity eventually, in my view, pays back big time when it comes to your career choices.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think we've made it. I think it's authenticity as a critical skill for a career in the 22nd century. And I think with this, we say goodbye, wrapping up. Milton, thank you very much. Any final words?
No, just stay safe. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.